Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special stream tonight with my good friend Melon. We shall be looking at Nixon and Trump, a presidential comparison. How are you, Melon?
Oh, I'm doing fine, sir. I've noticed some similarities between these two characters, both in the way they actually acted and in how media portrayed them. And I'm interested to get into that and to have your perspective as a non-American.
No, certainly, because I don't think we're exactly unique. I think people have been drawing comparisons between Nixon and Trump really for several years now, ever since Trump's first term. And I just want to get something out of the way first, because I've got a take which I think you might not agree with, but I want your perspective. People have generally compared them, and I think they've tended to view Trump as being more successful because, in a way, he hasn't been able to be cancelled in quite the same way that Nixon was. And to an extent, that's true. But I also feel that, in some ways, I actually think Nixon got more meaningful things done during his time in office than Trump has. And I'm reminded of obviously a very famous quote. It's a bit of a cliche, but Karl Marx once commented on Napoleon III's coup d'état in 1851, comparing it to the coup of Brumaire of his uncle Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon I, saying Hegel remarks somewhere that all great world historical facts and personages appear, so to speak, twice. He forgot to add the first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. And I very much feel that's a basic summary of Nixon and Trump for me. Nixon was the tragedy, whereas Trump's presidency has so many similar elements to Nixon's, but yet it feels a lot more farcical and even comical in some respects. What's your thought on that?
I think our culture has just degraded over time here, and that's what you say. What was it? The second time is farce. Is that?
Yeah, the first. So historical events or personages appear twice. First time as tragedy, second time as farce.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of true. I think things have definitely degraded, but I definitely view these two as like the same faction. I don't have like extensive proof of this. Maybe it's just a vibe that I don't know. It's my impression of it, at least, especially the way they're viewed in media. If you want to get into that.
Oh no, certainly, because that's probably the main comparison I think people will draw. Is it's obvious that both of them were demonized by the media of their day. And again, there's that very famous quote by Nixon that likes to get shared. What is it? It's something like the press is the enemy, the university professors are the enemy, the government is the enemy. It was clear that he knew that they were after him, but they got him in the end, unfortunately. And Trump, throughout his political career, was always called out, the mainstream media, fake news and all that.
Yeah, fake news as a phrase is actually a huge innovation. I almost wish Nixon had something like that back then.
And it certainly would have probably been to his benefit. Yeah, so in terms of getting into some comparisons, so I should also mention that Melon here does have a few clips or images we'll bring up at various points where relevant. So I'll start us off by kind of just going into some comparisons, and he'll notify me when there's something significant that he wants us to look at.
Yes, indeed.
Is there anything you think we could start off with, or
let's go for the Futurama thing? That has to be addressed, of course.
Oh, certainly. Let's have a look. Oh, there we go.
I give you the next president.
Oops, sorry. I've got the bloody intro still up. Let me take that down. Try that again.
Nixon's back!
Morbo will now introduce tonight's candidates. Puny Human number 1, Puny Human number 2, and Morbo's good friend, Richard Nixon.
Hello, Morbo. How's the family?
Belligerent and numerous.
Good man. Nixon's pro-war and pro-family.
Great. First he steals my body, now he's touching my stuff.
Right.
And he looks. They actually make him look more base than he actually was. I'll carry on. Sorry. Oh, hello. Hello. You're muted. Sir.
Apologies, my dogs are going crazy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think all that clip does is show, makes Nixon look even more base than he actually was. Being on this like giant mech, and and it's an interesting element there because this idea of him being pro-war, I think, is kind of ridiculous because again, most people know that Nixon inherited the Vietnam War from the Johnson administration, and it's really interesting because even today, and even in places like Vietnam, the Vietnamese associate that war with Nixon and see him as like some evil war criminal, which I find.
Yeah, it can't be
strange.
overstated how vilified this guy was, especially like in my childhood. I remember this. I mean, Futurama, that was like 90s and early 2000s. He was just viewed as this evil guy, which I think people are now coming around to with how he's been talked, especially the Nixon Foundation on Twitter and so forth. They've really carried some weight for this guy, and I do think he was wrongly. He was almost like a Hitler figure. I mean, it's ridiculous how the lack of nuance there, right? And then maybe we could go into the madman theory clip, because I think this was a strategy from him.
Certainly. Yeah, so just before we get to that, just to give more thoughts. So ultimately, just to compare this again to Trump, again, I think the left have always tried to paint Trump as like some mad dog warmonger. And I think the problem is that I don't think he so much is. I think it's more the fact that he often makes bad judgments and trusts people he really shouldn't, like neocons and Zionists. And that's probably not kind of completely defeated this whole image of him trying to present himself as the peace president.
Yeah, instability is a huge advantage sometimes, though, and it's funny, this comparison that comes to mind. Do you know who Asmongold is?
Of course, I know who Asmongold is.
Yeah, of course you do. Right. So he has this take that if you're the leader of anything, even like a silly video game thing, you don't want to have any firm rules. You want to be unpredictable, because then that has a chilling effect on enemy behavior, essentially, because they don't know where the line is.
A very Joseph Stalin strategy, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, but yeah.
That's certainly. Okay, there was a clip. You said was it like madman theory?
Yes, sir. The truth about the madman theory.
Just what I would call a madman theory. I think that overstates it. I remember Johnson telling me in 1959, or 69, I should say, that Johnson told me when he came to the White House that he felt that one of his mistakes was to give the Soviet an impression that we wanted peace and we would pay almost any price to get it. He said one of the advantages that Ike had, he always called him Ike, I never did, but he said one of the advantages that Ike had was that the Russians were afraid of Ike. Afraid of him because he had been the great commander in World War II, and because of his military background, and just because of the kind of man he was, even though Eisenhower was a very amiable, pleasant, grandfatherly type. But they knew that beneath that exterior was a very cold, tough fellow.
Do you think they were afraid of you?
Oh, yes. Well, they were afraid of me, though, not because of my appearances and not because of my speeches, but because of what I had done. There is nothing that added more to my credibility, certainly with the Russians, and with others as well, than that I took great risks in order to bring the war to Vietnam to a conclusion, to assure the withdrawal of our forces, the incursion into Cambodia. The purpose of that was to shorten the war, to make sure that our withdrawal program could go forward on schedule, and to save American lives, and it worked. The fact that would be 3 weeks before the summit meeting in Moscow, which we wanted, which they wanted as well, that we bombed and mined Haiphong after there was a great North Vietnamese offensive supported by Soviet tanks and guns, which we could not tolerate. I remember people said, well, you can still go to Moscow even though Saigon is lost. I said, no way. I said, I can't be sitting across the table from Brezhnev when Soviet tanks are rumbling through the streets of Saigon. And that's why we did what we did. And despite all the predictions by some of our Soviet experts to the effect that they would have no choice but to cancel the summit, it made them really, I think, more eager to have it. And the other thing, which I think may have had some impact on their thinking, was that even after the elections of 1972, the December bombing, which was the critical action that was taken in order to break the deadlock in Paris and have the peace negotiation, that was a very difficult decision, but it was necessary. Now, all of these actions, you don't take them in order to prove that you're a madman or that you're a tough guy or a macho on the rest. It's simply you take them when it is in the interest of your foreign policy, and also to make sure that you are a credible leader when you meet with others or when they take actions that you want to oppose.
That's very interesting because, you know what this actually reminds me of? This actually makes me think of the current strategy of the IRGC in this kind of Iran war that's going on. They seem to be doing a very madman doctrine, and it seems to have kind of really thrown Trump off because he keeps vacillating between negotiation and cracking down on them, but it's complicated by the fact that Israel just doesn't want to let up. So it's almost like both Israel and Iran are playing into this madman theory while Trump isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they're doing it too. I feel like Trump is doing this, though. I mean, the reason I bring this up is because I think this is what he's doing in Iran is very similar to Linebacker 2, which was the end stage of the Vietnam War, where Nixon set an insane amount of resources to just smash that country, and then that worked. I mean, he got everything he wanted and got out, but unfortunately what happened is Congress passed some sort of law that made it so he couldn't take any action in Southeast Asia anymore. And that's actually why the South fell. It wasn't because it was because he got backstabbed at home, right? And I'm not saying that like what's happening in Iran is justified, but I certainly draw parallels with it and what Nixon did.
No, certainly. The only difference is one important thing to remember is with Vietnam towards the end, you had the what's called the Vietnamification, where the American military presence and advisors were being slowly withdrawn, and then the South was to take on the full war effort. Whereas in this situation in the Middle East, if anything, you're not getting like Israelification. We're really getting an Amerification if this a threat of Marines trying to take Cargo Island is any sign of that.
That's certainly true. It is interesting to me that Israel's getting just obliterated by this. I mean, you would think they would have some. Well, they're not known for being very self-aware. I mean, maybe they didn't foresee this hubris. I'm not sure on that.
Well, actually, another comparison that might be even better compared to Vietnam is Ukraine, because if you think about it, Trump has inherited that situation from a previous Democrat administration, like Nixon did with Vietnam, and yet Trump seems to be really back and forth. You know, he was promising, "Yep, I'm gonna get peace." He's wants to extend oil response to Putin. Then the Russians had their demands, and he seems to completely flip and go, right, we're going to keep sending our weapons and whatnot to Ukraine. And again, it's like with Nixon in Vietnam, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain faction in America that definitely views this as like the end stage of the war on terror, and this is like all the same conflict. I'm not saying that's right, but that's certainly how a lot of people here view it. They do want like a permanent solution, and I think maybe that's. I mean, there's obviously like the Zionist thing of like we don't have to get into what's described as conspiracy theories, but are probably accurate, right, about that region and ambitions of certain Middle East democracies and so forth. But I think there is this impulse in America of a finish the job type thing, even if that's wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can understand you finishing the job if the idea of the job is that this conflict has really gone on as like a Cold War ever since 1979, in the case of Iran, and therefore this is semblance of we have to finish this conflict for good, even though it may get a lot of young American men killed, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely. We could pivot into Vietnam here, or we could talk about Trump, Trump's attitude on this stuff. Up to you.
Yeah, let's look at Trump's attitude. Hang on, let's bring this up. Right, okay. Trump's negotiation approach. So, but ambiguity has been an enduring part of Trump's negotiation toolkit from his early days as a businessman to the present day as occupant of the Oval Office. Before running for president, he wrote, "Never let anyone know exactly where you're coming from. Knowledge is power, so keep as much of it to yourself as possible." "I want to be unpredictable," Trump told the audience at one of his presidential campaign rallies. Indeed, he stressed in the campaign foreign policy speech that we must, as a nation, be more unpredictable. For example, in a pre-presidential television interview, he refused to rule out the use of nuclear weapons, not for any strategic reasons, but because this would violate one of his core negotiation precepts. You don't want to, say, take everything off the table because you're a bad negotiator if you say that. Look, nuclear should be off the table, but would there be a time when it could be used? Possibly. I would never take any of my cards off the table. Finally, upon becoming president, Trump said in a television interview, "I just don't want people to know what my thinking is. Unpredictability has become the new normal," wrote one academic commentator summing up the Trump approach to international affairs. Yeah, I can certainly see where he is coming from. The one difference I'll say is that I feel with Nixon was only like this with his geopolitical rivals and enemies. So like the Soviets or the Vietnamese, where it feels like Trump is trying to deploy this on everybody, including supposed American allies, and that's what's leading, I think, to a lot of tension and frustration. Where he goes around demanding Greenland and then climbing down from it and then demanding it again.
That's a fair criticism. On the instability thing, because things are so unstable now, sometimes looking at the effects of the actions is the only way you can intuit what's going on. At least that's a thought I have. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. If you want to look at some of those other images and give your impression of them.
All right. Anyone in particular?
Nope, they're all sort of the same vein.
Oh, they all look like their Twitter posts. Is that the right ones I'm looking at?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Andrew Torber. Okay. That feeling when Trump's hubris and ego are going to get Israel flattened and end the American regime's globalist experiment and Middle Eastern escapades for good. Based. Okay, yeah. That's an interesting take. It's like, this is a bad character personality of Trump's, but it's actually going to serve our interest in the long term.
Yeah, and Andrew Torba, a notable Pennsylvanian, by the way, is not a fan of Trump. But this is community sentiment of what's happening, right? And he's not the only one. There's a couple more.
Certainly. Right. Okay, Josh Neal. So, Scripty tweeting, GSD's condominium. I don't get why the DR doesn't see this as total victory. Trump 24 normies get red-pilled. Trump 26 new F-slurs get portrayed like 18. The end of the Great Israel Project. Josh Neal quoting, "Echoing my own thoughts of late, 10 years of Trump has fractured the post-war order, burned out and demoralized the left, discredited the right, and now for the closing act, potentially ending Israel's reign of terror."
So he's broken the dialectic and destroyed Israel on accident. Like that's the read right now from the whatever faction you want to call this, right? So it's in a weird way, both the truthsters and like everybody else think the same thing right now, but think it for different reasons. I mean, it's a weird position to be in.
No, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can ultimately say that Israel's downfall was its own fault, but it's just been completely turned up to 11 because you have someone like Trump they're trying to use as a weapon, but Trump ends up being a double-edged sword in a way.
Yeah, he's like a catalyst supercharging a chemical reaction or something.
Yeah. There's another one. Right, Alba Rising. Hitler tried to destroy Jewish power and made them more powerful than ever. Trump tried to expand Jewish power and ended up destroying it. Retard maxing attorney into
Yes, okay. So I have a theory on this. I think that the madman theory and retard maxing are actually aligned. Why don't we get a primer on retard maxing real quick? Pull up that clip if you'd like to.
Sure.
See too much. Everyone thinks that you got to have this internal monologue, that you're an intelligent person. Listen, I can have that, but you know what? I can turn it off.
So true. And like another way of saying this is just using your instincts rather than like theory selling about this stuff, right?
No, certainly. I guess it's like, you do you, I suppose.
Yeah, I have a clip about this. Give me one moment.
Sure.
Professional podcaster here, folks, right? Okay, yeah, pull up Nixon refusing to theory sell. That's it.
He discussed some of his tactics for handling the meetings and the techniques that he's going to use. He says Henry's urging him to do it Henry's way, which is to get into the long, drawn-out historical and philosophical discussions with Joe, which the president is not inclined to do. Henry's also urging him to start in the plenary session with reading a written statement, which the president also is not inclined to do, and intends to follow his own technique on this rather than Henry's advice. He feels that he'll do much better that way, and I think he's absolutely right.
Interesting. I just like the idea that you just got that Henry Kissinger having some intellectual, deep conversation with Chu Enlai, the foreign minister and premier of China at the time, and just Nixon just going off. Now I'm gonna do what I think is best from the gut, essentially.
Yeah, and this is a very American way of doing things that Europeans may not. I mean, like the European mind cannot comprehend this meme is real for a real thing. Like this is sort of a cowboy approach, right? The unstable cowboy approach to doing things, and I think Trump and Nixon are very alike in this. Yeah, not a fully formed thought by me, but just occurred to me.
No, it's certainly true. But I mean, in fairness to Nixon, I don't know. It's a shame I didn't get this clip, but there was a very famous clip of Kissinger being interviewed by Buckley on firing line, and the first question Buckley asks Kissinger is, why did you give Nixon a abridged edition of Spengler's Decline of the West? And I just love Kissinger's response to it. And so to give more props to Nixon, he read Spengler's Decline of the West, which I think is an incredible feat. And I certainly think he was very civilizational in his thinking. And I think having Kissinger there certainly steered him in that direction. It should also be important to remember that Kissinger, his doctoral thesis was actually on civilizational history. It was on Spengler, Toynbee, and Kant. So at least Nixon had some stronger intellectual props in his administration, whereas sadly with Trump, I don't really think you've got anybody who's equivalent to an intellectual heavyweight such as Kissinger.
Well, it's also interesting that Kissinger, I'm pretty sure, was of the tribe, right? He is.
Oh
right?
yeah,
Right,
he was a German Jew, yeah.
So here you have, Nixon, the white guy, keeping the Jays close, right, but ignoring them when he feels it's appropriate. And I mean, people are more critical of Trump, but I feel like there's a little bit of that dynamic going on here. I mean, why is Israel getting flattened right now? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm drawing connections that aren't real, but that's where my mind goes.
Donald Trump secretly takes in the Henry Kissinger view of the Jews. If I was if not for the nature of my birth, I'd be an anti-Semite, and it's a pity both sides can't lose.
Oh, I didn't know that about him, actually. I didn't know that.
No, those are real Kissinger quotes.
So the self-hating Jay, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Why don't we go with the next Nixon retard maxing clip here?
At about 2:30, or maybe a little bit before, apparently Joe and Lai appeared at the guest house unannounced, got a hold of Henry and said that Chairman Mao would like to see the president if he would come over. Henry rushed upstairs, told the president. He slapped on his coat. The two of them went out, grabbed Bob Taylor on the way, and took off for Mao's residence, unbeknownst to anybody else. Taylor came into the Chapin schedule planning meeting and said this is what they were going to do. He was very concerned about it, but that he was under orders to tell no one, and that they were not to tell Ziegler, make any public thing out of it until they got back. So Dwight came right down and told me. We debated how to handle the thing for a while, called Ziegler and had him come over, and I told him. Ron was holding a tangerine in his hand, took a bite of it, getting about half the tangerine in one bite, peeling it off. He was, to say the least, a little startled. We spent a very long hour and a half trying to figure out what the various contingencies were, since we had no idea when they'd be back or what would happen in the meantime. Since we couldn't announce any of this, we didn't exactly know how to handle it. We debated it back and forth as to what to do. Also speculated on all the wild range of possibilities that you have when you're sitting in a Chinese guest house with Red Army troops guarding you outside, and you kind of wonder, as the president's taken off alone with no staff, no security, except one agent, no doctor, etc. But the worries generally turned out to be unfounded, since the president returned shortly after 4. Anyway, the president called me up, told me he'd been over to see Mao. Obviously, very impressed with the whole thing, but didn't get into any details at that time.
Very, very impressive. You know, on the enemy territory, you just you go and meet the leader.
Yeah, he just left. He didn't think about it. He's like, oh. Then he just left all his... He brought one guy with him, right?
No,
I mean,
exactly.
Most people wouldn't do that. They're like, oh, we got to plan this out. We got to, so forth. It's a very American thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, it reminds me of drawing a comparison to Trump, when Trump, I think in 2017, went to go meet Kim Jong-un, in North Korea. He went alone, over very little security, and then came back.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that. And people at the time, there were like thousands of like shrieking women on the internet going, oh my God, I can't believe he stepped over the line. That was so dangerous, so like irresponsible, blah, blah, blah. It's a very, I don't know, I keep coming back to like, it's a cowboy approach, right?
No, certainly. Just thing I want to say, as we're touching on China here, this is actually an interesting another comparison we can draw is Nixon and Trump's attitudes to China. Because what's interesting is that Trump, in my mind, it seems to be doing the opposite of what Nixon was trying to do. Because to put this in context, in the 1960s, through to about Nixon's presidency, relations were breaking down between the USSR and China, despite both of them being communist after Stalin's death. And you have Khrushchev come in. Khrushchev goes on the policy of de-Stalinization, where he starts to relax a lot of the more repressive elements of the Soviet Union, and that more or less continues under Brezhnev in the 60s and 70s. And Mao, we should really understand, was basically Stalin, so China's Stalin, essentially. And Mao very much didn't like this course the Soviet Union was taking. And I think there was also an element of, by that point, because he'd consolidated his regime, I think he was starting to wanting to shake a little bit free of the Soviets in terms of foreign policy. And so you have what's known as a Sino-Soviet split, where you have this massive break in relations between the two. And that's why Nixon went on these ping-pong negotiations with China, as he wanted to try and establish a relationship with Mao and try and really completely sever any real strong relation between these two communist powers. And so, again, I think a very novel strategy. But it's interesting if we're looking at today with Russia and China, where rather than trying to break China away from Russia, Trump is trying to break Russia away from China, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, China is definitely the stronger of the two, and Russia has a little bit of a dependency on China, which is a situation it's not ideal for it, really. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why I believe Trump has tried to end this war in Ukraine, because he wants to to ultimately give Putin what he wants to win him over. And what's also interesting is with this war with Iran at the moment, with the price of oil, obviously Russia's doing very well because considering this increase. And so also something else is him dropping sanctions on Russian oil as well. It's it really does seem to be like that Trump is really like trying to do what Nixon did with China, essentially. Oh, any thoughts?
Yeah, and there also seems to be like the this isn't a fully formed thought either, but there's like a gay like global American empire type, although I think that's kind of a depreciated term. The deep state is another way to put it. There's like a deep state in each of these countries. In Russia, there's these apparatchiks, and in China, there's like Deng Xiaoping and Zhou Enlai's like super pro-business faction, in contrast to the like the really old structure that was in China before revolution, that is like way more nativist and ethnic focused, right? And it occurs, and I'm not an expert at this, right? But it occurs to me that Nixon snuck away to meet with like the great man, even though Mao was pretty evil, who was more like ethnically minded rather than talk to the various. It's almost like he was evading their deep state to go talk directly with the big man type thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see the viability of that, talking to the man directly without anyone else interfering. Though I would say that, to my knowledge, I don't think Mao was that ethnically minded. The only instance I can think of is obviously he called his ideology, socialism with Chinese characteristics, because ultimately Marxist-Leninism is predicated on the idea of a revolution of the industrial working class. But you're talking about China, a country which has been barely industrialized, so most of the proletariat are farmers, and so Maoism is essentially a form of agrarian socialism. But other than that, it was more really later when you, as you mentioned, you get to Deng or even Xi Jinping today, where China's clearly taking a more ethno-nationalist approach, if you like.
Yeah, it's not a one-to-one comparison. I just know that China, my impression is that they have always have this like emperor figure who the people look up to. I mean, isn't like their origin story, they had an emperor that built a dam and then they could do agriculture, and that's just like, in their mind, that's just repeated throughout the centuries. I'm not sure how much the normal people in China respect these various like apparatchiks and so forth.
It's interesting because what you've talked about there reminds me, because there's this idea of Oriental despotism, that the Orient is historically governed by these tyrannical despots who are able to rule through their control of various resources, whether it's water or food, etc. And this is elaborated by the Marxist Karl Wittfogel, to give examples such as ancient Egypt or Chinese emperors. So you could almost say there's a point to that. Although it should be noted that Wittfogel was a communist to neocon convert, and so when he wrote that book in the 60s, I think it was more there to attack the communist East, if you know what I mean. But in terms of looking at someone like Mao, it should be noted that Mao was probably closer to someone like China's very first emperor and unifier, Qin Shi Huang, than he is to any of the later emperors, because Qin Shi Huang was his whole reign was dominated by one of what's known as China's historic philosophies, which is the philosophy of legalism, which is essentially that everything has to be run through like this top-down legalistic state, whereas most of the later Chinese dynasties were along the lines of the Confucian mandate of heaven. So, and I do know for a fact that Mao did actually admire Qin Shi Huang, funnily enough, so there is an element of that there, certainly.
Yeah, now we're getting out of my depth. You know more about the East than I do, for sure. We could get into Nixon's take on the Shah of Iran now, speaking of Oriental despotism and so forth.
I have actually seen this clip beforehand, so this is I'm good you brought this up.
The Shah is generally accepted as having been a very repressive and oppressive ruler. His Savak tortured and killed. He lived in considerable splendor and opulence while there was terrible poverty in his country. In your book, Leaders, you write that he was not ruthless enough in quashing those who threatened his nation's stability. Do you think he should have been more ruthless?
Yes, I do, particularly in view of the fact that his opponents were not those who were basically more liberal, but because basically they were reactionary. They were the true reactionaries. Let's look at the Shah for just a moment and look at him very fairly. He actually was a progressive in a number of ways. He instituted a land reform program. He instituted a literacy program. He sent thousands of students from Iran to the United States, and particularly the United States, to study, and in other countries as well. He liberated women. The irony was that those he liberated, the women and the students he sent abroad, they came back and joined the revolutionary forces. And the irony was that the Shah, being progressive, was attacked as being reactionary and conservative on these particular issues, whereas his opponents were the reactionaries. Putting it very bluntly and very simply, the Shah was trying to move Iran into the 20th century. His opponents, Khomeini et al., wanted to move Iran back into the Dark Ages, and that's what they've done. Now, there was some repression, true. Now there is total repression. There may not have been enough land reform. Now there is none whatever. What I am simply suggesting is this, that when we look at the Shah, we have to look at him in terms of what he confronted. And he confronted revolutionary forces there that were not working, in my view, for what was best for Iran and certainly not best for ourselves. And most important from the United States standpoint, instead of having a friend in Iran, we now have one that is not only not a friend, but one that considers us to be the great Satan.
Yeah, so again, thank you for bringing this clip up. Yeah, 'cause it's very interesting, Nixon's insight, because though just to add a bit more information there, he is right that Mohammad Reza Shah and the Pahlavi dynasty more broadly were relatively progressive by Iran's 20th century standards. However, it should be understood here that he mentioned, that there were Iranian students in Western universities, but it should be noted that those students were pretty progressive and left-wing. And obviously he's mentioned the opposition, including Khomeini, as being reactionary. Well, what I don't think Nixon's really elaborated on there properly is the fact that the Shah was brought down by a broad coalition of both people who were to his right, but also people to his left, because he had so badly mismanaged the situation. And he was essentially seen as, if anything, his problem was he was too moderate. He wasn't progressive enough for the progressives, and he wasn't conservative enough for the more conservative forces in society. And they everybody ended up uniting to overthrow him. So that's what I've got to say, really, though, because it wasn't there, but there's another clip where Nixon elaborates on the Shah further, where he says, ultimately, we should have done all we could to stop him being deposed and from being removed, because ultimately it should be remembered that in 1953 the British and Americans had propped him up against his insurgent Prime Minister Mossadegh, and yet why didn't they do the same in '79? And I think it's because there was some ambivalence towards him. Well, unfortunately, to American foreign policy interests, I think certainly that was a mistake to not keep him in place, and we now have the situation that we're in. The only thing I would say with Trump on Iran, obviously Trump has obviously had to always deal with the Islamic Republic, though compared to Nixon, I feel like if Nixon was still alive today and was having to deal with the Islamic Republic, I think he would be more like he was dealing with Mao. I think he would be more balanced and more trying to find some way to work this out, whereas Trump just seems more interested in just whatever Israel wants.
Yeah, part of me, I sort of group these two individuals together in my mind, and I wonder if Trump feels that it was a mistake to lose this guy, and what's happening there is intolerable because they're just not friends. I wonder if it's like that simple. I mean, I'm sure like the Israel thing, plays into it, but especially like, how old was he when this happened? Like 30 or something?
79, so Trump would have been 33 or something.
Right. So this would have been not a formative experience, but he would have been like that was an L, right? That needs fixed. I mean, maybe that's simple in his mind. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's fair. It's definitely an L, but the problem is, I just think his whole strategy of going about it is rather stupid, to be honest, because you are using threats and violence against a regime that thrives off threats and violence and martyrdom. So, again, I just think it's partly a completely misunderstanding of who you're dealing with.
Right, and we could get further into Nixon's opinion of this. He did some later interviews on it, or we could get into Trump's opinion around the 80s.
Certainly. Is it this Perfect Enemies one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's rest of Nixon's.
Mr. Nixon, America has been criticized for abandoning friends like the Shah, whom you strongly supported, and you've criticized our abandoning him. But isn't the danger just as great in sticking with regimes that have lost the support of their people, like the Shah, like Somoza, like Ian Smith? Again and again, it's said that we back despots and dictators.
I couldn't disagree with you more. What you have to understand is that the choice was never between the Shah and somebody better, but between the Shah and somebody infinitely worse.
Well, we don't know
And
that
what
in
you
the
have to-
beginning.
Well, the point is, if we didn't know it at the beginning, we'd better know it now. We have friends all over the world like the Shah, and we have friends, for example, in Saudi Arabia at the present time. Because that government happens to be corrupt, it is claimed, are we going to abandon them? Let's take China, for example. Because China is more Stalinist than the Soviet Union, are we going to say that we're going to abandon them? No.
But don't we ever say, this man is no good for this country, this man is a dictator, this man is a despot, and maybe it could be better? Or do we automatically assume it won't be?
We do not automatically assume anything. We have to use our influence and use it effectively, but it's got to be used with a rifle rather than a shotgun, and we must not jump from the frying pan into the fire. It was a great mistake to do what we did to the Shah, and if that had not happened, we wouldn't have the hostage situation today. If the United States doesn't stand up for its friends, we're not going to have friends. That's true of the Shah. It's true of others as well. The choice is not a good one many times. The choice is between, however, for example, when you really equate the Shah with some of the others, I'm really surprised because the choice is between one who is a friend of the United States, whatever may be his failings, and one who is an enemy. One who tries to export his revolution and one who is trying to at least not threaten his neighbors. One who allows, as the Shah did, as you very well know, who allows some human rights, who allows some political rights, and does allow economic rights, and another regime that allows none. I would say there's no question about which side I come down on there. And the same is true of Somoza, the same is true of some of the others as well. I don't approve of some of them, but I would say I prefer some rights rather than none, and that's the choice that we have to face up to, or the United States is going to cease to be a great.
Yeah, no, thank you, because that's another clip I was alluding to. No, that's really interesting insight. This whole don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Better to keep somebody who is imperfect by our friends than get someone who's worse, who completely hates us. And also that quote there, a rifle rather than a shotgun. We've got to be targeted and precise. And yeah, I can't help but think of Trump when he says shotgun, because that seems to be Trump's approach very much.
Yeah, I feel like that's how he tries to run things. The foreign policy stuff does seem a little crazy from Trump, but I don't know. I drew a connection between those two things. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think it's feasible. I mean, Trump is a moderate pretty much, and it's better that okay, abortion wasn't completely banned, but at least it's banned in most of America, right? Would you rather have it be forced to have it everywhere?
It's not banned in most of America. It's in fact, I can't think of anywhere it's banned. Well, I might be wrong. Let's get into Trump's impression of Iran from 1987.
Okay. So what I was meaning is more the fact that where it's been relegated to the states, my understanding is that most states have some kind of thing like banning it or severely restricting it. That's what I meant.
Yeah, maybe like less than half do, probably.
Okay.
I don't know. America's a big place.
Oh, fair enough. Right. Okay, there we are. Right. He sketched out the first outline to 1987, spending $94,801 to place a full-page advert in 3 US newspapers. Trump declared the world was laughing at America's leaders over the Gulf crisis triggered by the Iran-Iraq war. As the US then escorted tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, Trump said, Washington was trying to protect ships we don't own, carrying oil we don't need, destined for allies who won't help. There's a line that echoes his tirades today, but back then, as he tested the waters for a possible presidential run, Trump had concluded the problem was a lack of backbone. Appearing a few weeks later at a New Hampshire Rotary Club event in 1987, Trump sneered at how the Iranian Navy, little runabouts with machine guns, he had held America to ransom. Why couldn't we go in there and take some of their oil fields near the coast, he asked. The then 41-year-old businessman put it even more starkly in the 1988 interview with The Guardian. One bullet shot at one of our men or ships and I'd do a number on Cargo Island, I'd go in and take it. Well, that is very revealing that he's had that view for that long.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of this. What's your impression?
Well, it's made it even more apparent to me that Trump has clearly had been gunning for Iran for a very long time, and this isn't just something he's done spur of the moment because of Israel.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of my read of it. I don't know like where he originally got the idea. I'm out of my depth there. The person who posted this was like was saying, "Oh, this is proof that he's like been in the Jews' pocket forever," type thing. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it.
Oh, I see this more in terms of his rhetoric in regards to things like tariffs. Our allies are ripping us off by not paying tariffs. I kind of see a similar thing here, where the US is providing some service, but they're not really getting any kind of financial benefit from it. And I would actually say this is probably one criticism I have of Trump, because he's a businessman. He seems to think of everything in like financial and money terms. He doesn't sort of think in, well, sometimes you get something from something that's not necessarily financial.
That's true. I think this sentiment was echoed by Nixon as well. That clip from the 90s, if you'd like.
One moment.
Isn't enough for people to say, here's the great big United States. We're the richest country in the world. We're the strongest country in the world. We're the only complete superpower. What's the United States going to do? My answer is, we'll do our part. But let the other economic superpowers, like the Germans, like the Japanese, do their share too. We don't ask them to take over, but they should do more and make up for what they cannot contribute in the way of military power.
Well, that's interesting. Surprisingly consistent between Nixon and Trump then in that respect.
Yeah, I really view these guys as like the same faction. I don't, and if I'm just some guy on the internet, right? If you want to have more in-depth read on Nixon and more importantly how they took him down with Watergate and so forth, I'd actually recommend Pete Q and Thomas 77's series on the Cold War, episode 11, Nixon and Détente, as well as the Nixon and Watergate series, which unfortunately you can't get on YouTube anymore because they banned them, but you can look it up on Odyssey. Also, if anyone wants the actual files, DM me on Twitter at Melon the Giraffe, and I'll send you them.
Oh, I'll have to give that a watch at some point. No, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
Just the last thing I wanted to sort of touch on is the use of force in general. Americans, this is something Europeans don't understand, and this isn't like a criticism. It's just you don't live here. The use of force by the police and the military is overwhelmingly supported by most Americans, especially if we're winning. Americans are not critical of wars. They are critical of wars that they lose.
That's there, certainly.
And I really think there's a similarity between how Nixon handled the end of Vietnam and what's going on now with Iran. You could say like this Iran thing, that like he just started it and this is a new war. I view these as an extension of what's been happening our whole lifetime as millennials. This is the same conflict in my view. And I understand like maybe I'm wrong here, but that's the impression I have. if you want to check the no prescribed targets list, or give your reaction to what I said there.
No, certainly I think that's fair. And another thought I've just had for comparison is it's interesting, isn't it, that obviously we talked about Nixon in Vietnam and obviously him responsible for kind of helping America withdraw from that conflict. But of course, under Ford, if I recall, you had obviously the fall of Saigon. What is interesting with Trump is that what withdrawal did Trump start that a successor fucked up? It was Afghanistan. And I remember people literally compared the fall of Kabul to the fall of Saigon. So that's another interesting comparison, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. And this is viewed very similarly to, this criticism of like, oh, we're getting into another war. I view this as very similar to the blowback Nixon got about the widening of the war in Vietnam, which led to some incidents that where he was, later crucified over. If you want to pull up the widening of the war clip.
Sure.
When news of the Cambodian incursion broke in the United States, there was public outcry. Many believed that in spite of President Nixon's promises to get out of Vietnam, he meant to expand the war. Protests erupted at universities all over the country. On May 4th, 1970, at Kent State University in Ohio, National Guardsmen shot 4 students dead.
Right.
Yeah, no, so I'm just thinking this reminds me because Mandrel has been doing his series reading Days of Rage by Brian Burroughs, where he goes over all of the radical left-wing groups doing this stuff during the 60s and 70s. So like the Weather Underground, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and obviously a lot of them are targeting Nixon's administration. And so it's probably people, obviously this is students here, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were probably in similar circles as those aforementioned groups. But of course, under Trump, we've seen similar things. We've seen extreme groups like Antifa, because I recall, didn't they attack an army base in Texas last year?
Yeah, and that's where my mind went to, is the Days of Rage thing. I mean, an oil refinery in Texas just blew up, and there's a massive courthouse fire happening in Georgia where there's like election fraud cases happening right now. I don't know, man. I mean, I'm getting deja vu here, right?
No, certainly, and there's actually another comparison that I wanted to bring up, because obviously one major one we can draw between Nixon and Trump is obviously both of them contested 3 presidential elections, won 2 and lost 1, and the loss, both of them, 1960 for Nixon and 2020 for Trump, have both got question marks over their legitimacy.
Oh, they certainly do. And just a point on Kent State, Will Tanner, who's a very good follow on Twitter, points out that the American people were overwhelmingly in support of the National Guard cracking down on these communists. It's only in retrospect that this was viewed as like this insane atrocity and like Nixon's Hitler. I mean, just think of like the COVID stuff, right? The way that's being written right now in history books is it's a crime. It's not reflecting what happened. People are being gaslit like crazy. That's what happened during this period as well.
No, certainly. Right.
Yeah, if we want to get into no prescribed targets.
Right.
Peace talks resumed in the beginning of December, but the North Vietnamese returned to their original unyielding stance. And before the year was out, the talks had collapsed. In response, President Nixon sent the North Vietnamese an ultimatum: return to the negotiation table, or bombing would begin again in earnest. The North Vietnamese chose not to reply. Nixon's response was quick and decisive. On December 18, 1972, field commanders received the order that began the Linebacker II campaign. Quote, "You are directed to commence a maximum effort repeat, maximum effort of B-52 strikes in the Hanoi-Haiphong areas, unquote. The new campaign would be called Linebacker 2. American planes and pilots are engaged in Linebacker 2, the most massive bombing campaign of the Vietnam War. For the first time ever, unrelenting firepower would be aimed at the heart of North Vietnam, Hanoi. Their only restrictions: civilian areas, religious sites, and POW compounds. While Linebacker 2 was planned as a 3-day maximum effort strike, U.S. airmen were instructed to be prepared to carry on beyond 3 days, if necessary.
All the bets were off in this December campaign. We went after everything. We bombed all the airfields. We bombed barracks. We bombed missile sites. We bombed radar sites. We bombed dock areas. We bombed everything there was. We were all bombing downtown. There were no proscribed targets.
Right, that's what's happening to Iran right now. And again, it's always been the case that Americans support wars that they win. I don't know how the Iran thing is going to shake out, but there was this frustration during Vietnam where like America was fighting with one hand behind its back. Americans hate that more than anything. Americans hate that more than Americans love to, the Patton clip comes to mind, like Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser.
And no, that's certainly true about one arm tied behind its back, because ultimately the problem with Vietnam is the US couldn't launch a full-on ground invasion, because if they did, the Chinese would have intervened, and that would have upset the whole relationship Nixon was trying to build with China, because obviously after the Korean War, where the same thing happened after the Chinese intervened when the Americans and allies were about to overrun the North. That's what happened there. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When Nixon did this, the Russians and the Chinese didn't do anything. He like cleared this ahead of time with them, and it seems to me that's the same thing that's happening with Iran. I mean, have China and Russia done anything?
Well, not much, but I would say Linebacker is probably more comparable to the 12-day war from last year, where Trump said to the Iranians, "Okay, and we're going to make a big like kabuki theater of like bombing your like nuclear enrichment. We're just going to clear that with you ahead of time." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, let's do that." And yeah, lo and behold.
I understand what you mean. I'm not sure. I think the scale of this thing needs to be understood. This was not kabuki theater. And I don't feel like what's happening right now is either. If you want to bring up the time lapse thing, and pause it when you bring it up, just so I can explain it first.
So Linebacker 2 one.
Yes, sir. Pause. Just to give context here, every little icon you see here with the code names is 3 B-52s with supporting, and B-52s are massive machines. So every single one of these is a cell of 3 B-52s with supporting anti-radar and anti-SAM planes below them bombing the anti-aircraft stuff. So this was a massive operation. Okay, go ahead. This was one day, by the way.
Wow, that's a lot of bombing. Yeah, the main comparison I can think of is what happened in Iraq before the invasion.
Yeah, that was America taking the gloves off. And guess what happened afterwards? They immediately cucked on everything and gave Nixon everything that he wanted. This only failed, like, in retrospect, because Congress backstabbed him.
Yeah, and I think that's something we may see with Trump, despite all his efforts with Iran. Obviously, with the midterms coming up later this year, which the Democrats are expected to win, you may have them. Yeah, I don't see the Democrats having any time for any endeavor Trump may have with Iran. So, yeah, history is going to repeat itself possibly.
In a weird way, some of the this was another Nixon clip that I failed to include. Nixon could actually trust some Democrats more than some of his Republicans, because they actually were serious and had in-group preference and wouldn't leak. And the Chuck Schumer thing, I think Chuck Schumer and Trump actually have like a weird understanding. Isn't Chuck from New York as well?
Yeah, he is.
So first of all, I'm not convinced that the midterms are going to be a bloodbath. I'm just not. This stinks a lot of like, oh, Trump's going to steal the election, like pre-programming stuff. I mean, it's like such undisputed conventional wisdom. I'm just not sure about that. But the other thing is, some of these Republicans hate him more than the Democrats do. Some of them are less reliable than the Democrats.
No, that's
I'm not
fair.
so. Anyway, those are my thoughts. What are yours?
No, that's fair. I mean, maybe what will happen is like in 2018, because in 2018 we were told the same thing. There was going to be this bloodbath for the GOP, but what happened is, okay, the Democrats won a majority in Congress, but it was a very slim majority of like one seat. So I don't know, maybe the same thing will happen. So, but yeah, but in terms of GOP portrayals within his own party, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that in the second term he's obviously got former Democrats and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK, when obviously he himself is a former Democrat, and obviously Elon, and yet you've got all these sort of neocons and such. Because again, that's actually another strong comparison is treachery, because with Nixon, very famously, especially during Watergate, a lot of people abandoned him and threw him to the wolves. And one particular one I can think of is Barry Goldwater, who was the former Republican presidential candidate in 1964 that lost to LBJ. And people like to claim that he was based because he opposed civil rights, but people should understand that he did that on like a libertarian argument, like, oh, it's wrong that it's like non-consensual or something. Whereas when it came to Nixon, Watergate hated Nixon, and he was actually the one who persuaded Nixon to resign. Ultimately,
Barry Goldwater did.
Yes, and Goldwater would go on to be someone very influential on Ronald Reagan. So many people blame Goldwater for the turn the GOP took after Nixon.
That's interesting, because I remember from childhood the media figure Rush Limbaugh talking about how in the minds of so many establishment Republicans, they are haunted by Barry Goldwater losing, and that's the reason they are so fearful and cowardly on many things. You activated an old memory there.
Yeah, but things with Goldwater, he's basically a libertarian. He actually ended up falling out with the GOP around the time of Bush Senior, because Goldwater was like pro-gay rights and stuff like that. Well, obviously, during that point, Bush Senior was going all like moral crusade stuff.
Right. Okay, I think we could wrap up with just a little personal courage anecdote from Nixon that people may have forgotten about.
The tragic incidents clip.
Yes, sir.
On another continent, 4,650 miles away.
Oh, this was in Venezuela. I forgot about this.
The news concerns
That's
the Vice
interesting.
President of the United States and his wife, arriving by plane at Caracas to conclude a tour of South America. Apparently unperturbed by warnings of a minority, but strongly resentful anti-American sentiment, Mr. Nixon pursues the whirlwind schedule which typified his 8-nation Latin American tour. Hostility rears its vilifying head. The vice president of a good neighbor is lampooned. Brewing is the most violent attack ever perpetrated on a high American official while on foreign soil. The vice president's car is leading a motorcade en route to a wreath-laying ceremony. The traffic is heavy and the motorcade forced to slow down. Then begins the barrage, rocks, eggs, debris. Several in the party are injured as both the vice president's and Mrs. Nixon's cars are pelted and spat upon. Mute evidence of the attack. At the American embassy, Mr. Nixon meets the press. Speaking of the attack, he says it is not easy to endure the kind of activity his party went through. The visit to Venezuela is cut short. Vigilant guards set up a formidable protection shield. But always the vice president reflects calm rather than concern after his turbulent experience. Mrs. Nixon, too, wins friends with her demeanor. Thus ends a South American tour which made many headlines.
Interesting, that was when he was vice president then.
Yeah, and I completely forgot that happened in Venezuela. I wonder, that makes me think of, what Trump did there. And I wonder what's really going on down there.
Well, there's actually another comparison I didn't think of before that I've just thought of now. Obviously, Trump did the whole thing with obviously Maduro in January, going in and getting rid of him, essentially a kind of armed coup. But what did Nixon do in Latin America? But obviously, the CIA under Nixon got rid of Salvador Allende and put in Pinochet in Chile in the early 70s. So that's Latin American coups are in the blood of both of them. Oh, hello.
Sorry, my dogs are going crazy.
That's all right. Yeah, just interesting though, albeit in the Venezuela case, that wasn't the CIA, that was an actual armed operation.
Yeah. Well, that's about all I got. That's my case for Trump and Nixon being the same faction, and that's what I got.
Oh no, well, thank you for showing those clips. Just have a couple of points I want to make in terms of a comparison. Obviously, with this Iran war, you've got this oil crisis, so to speak. Well, of course, under Nixon, we had the original 1973 oil crisis, which a lot of people have been comparing it to. The difference is that original oil crisis wasn't really Nixon's fault. That was because, obviously, in '67, you had the Six-Day War, where Israel launched a preemptive strike on the Arab coalition led by Egypt and Syria. And then 6 years later, in '73, you had the Yom Kippur War, where the Arab nations striked back. Israel wasn't completely defeated, but they did not perform as well as the first conflict. And because of the America and the West support for Israel, the Arab countries in OPEC launched an oil embargo, which has led to that crisis. And obviously, this year we've had it mostly with the Persian Gulf being shut off. So obviously, it's in this situation, this seems to be more of Trump's doing through this campaign by him and Israel.
Yeah, certainly.
And you've got a final clip, but in terms of other comparisons, obviously I've mentioned Watergate earlier, and obviously that's the main thing that brought down Nixon. There's several thoughts I want to have on that in terms of comparing it to Trump, because there's an awful lot you could. One element is that you may not remember this, but I think it was in the first year of Trump's presidency, it might have been the early part of his second year in 2018, but it was revealed that Obama had actually had Trump's campaign wiretapped, his original 2016 campaign. And I remember that coming out and people saying, wow, that's worse than Watergate, because it's one thing to send your guys in to the enemy camp and spy on them for one day, whereas Obama did it over the course of an entire campaign. So that's far more worse in terms of scope and duration. Yeah, absolutely nothing happened over it. So again, all these sort of moral fagging you've seen over Watergate. Oh, it was such a bad, evil act. Poor Nixon. But it's just to show that as the right, you literally can't do anything wrong, otherwise you'll be crucified. Whereas the left just repeatedly just do whatever they like and just get away with it.
Yeah, I think we need to bring back moral fagging. It's a very good, useful term.
No, certainly. But in terms of other comparisons to Watergate, now with Trump, there's other things we could do. What is Trump's Watergate? I mean, we could say it's just his entire presidency, basically, and the various impeachments. Obviously, the first one was over the phone call he had to Zelensky, where he was trying to get dirt on the Biden family because of Hunter Biden had used to work for the petrochemical giant Burisma, and Trump was trying to sniff out corruption on them, and then that's why they tried to impeach him, and that failed. Obviously, the second impeachment was over J6, but that also failed. But again, this idea of you egged on a mob to attack the sacred halls of Congress, but it should be remembered that Trump didn't whip them up to do that. He kind of just made a speech, then buggered off, and they just went in on their own accord.
Yeah, those grandmas walking through the velvet roped thing.
No, exactly. Gaslighting, if you will.
It is gaslighting. It's historical gaslight. It's the same thing that happened to Nixon, man. Like nobody viewed this guy as Hitler, right? I mean, people overwhelmingly approved of what he was doing, but 40 years of gaslighting and rewriting history, here we are.
Do you know what the biggest insult is? I remember seeing an advert a few years ago for a new show all about Watergate, and you'll never guess what it was called.
What?
Gaslight.
They're making fun of us at this point. Surely.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah. But it's a final comparison to Watergate. I think ultimately what might prove to be Trump's real Watergate is the Epstein stuff. And what's your thought on
that? I've been on the internet a long time, and I can't help but notice that you used to get banned for talking about that, and now that Trump's the target of it, like it's like on normie Facebook and everything. That's my thought, right? I mean, what changed with the moderation on it? I mean, I'm not saying like he is or wasn't in it. I have no idea. It's just interesting who got banned when and when that stopped. That's my thought.
No, certainly. Because one thought I've had is, I'm like, why are the Democrats so keen? They do realize that plenty of their own people are implicated in the Epstein files. And there's two thoughts of mine. One is they don't care. They're prepared to sacrifice some of their own as long as they destroy Trump over it. Or the other thing that's a darker thought I've had is they've got such institutional power, they will just make sure that Trump gets destroyed over it as like the fall guy, but they'll use enough clout to stop like their own people from being punished too much for it.
Yeah, could happen. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah. Other than that, that was all of the comparisons, really. Let's play your final clip.
There's plenty of anger right now. How can you have more?
You don't think it'll exacerbate the problem?
David, I mean, I know you're a sophisticated guy. The world is a mess. The world is as angry as it gets. Well, you think this is going to cause a little more anger? The world is an angry place. All of this has happened. We went into Iraq. We shouldn't have gone into Iraq. We shouldn't have gotten out the way we got out. The world is a total mess. Take a look at what's happening with Aleppo. Take a look at what's happening in Mosul. Take a look at what's going on in the Middle East. And people are fleeing, and they're going into Europe and all over the place. The world is a mess.
The world is a mess and can only be ruled by a madman.
No, certainly. Sorry, this reminds me of a meme I posted on Twitter the other week. I was talking to AM, and we're talking about Ukraine and Iran, etc. And it was talking about the idea Biden was flushed away with Ukraine, and will Trump be flushed away with Iran? And I remember posting a picture of the now deceased Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei with a. Have you played Morrowind at all?
No, I only know the memes. It was before my time.
Well, in Morrowind, if you kill an important NPC, you get a message that goes something like, "The thread of prophecy has been severed." That's it. With this character's death, the thread of prophecy has been severed. You cease, restore a previous save, or persist in the doomed world that you have created.
World you have created, yeah.
And I posted that on a picture of Ali Khamenei.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope everybody's enjoyed this stream. I thought this was an interesting and relevant comparison. Well, one can only see how the rest of Trump's presidency plays out and see if all I have to say is I hope he doesn't end up like Nixon, but I've got a horrible feeling he might do.
I'm going to be the optimistic Yankee here and say things will be different this time.
Fair enough. And right, have we had any super chats? None on YouTube. I'm just going to check entropy. No, nothing on entropy. All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for watching. Is there anything you want to show Melon before we get out of here?
No, sir. Thank you for having me on. It was fun.
Yeah, we should try to do this more, because the last time we streamed together was the Millennial Culture mini-series from last year.
Yeah, has it been a year already? Man. Crazy.
Well, it was June and July, so yeah, 9 months. Right, well, is there anything you wanted to promote or show?
No, sir. Thanks for having me on.
All right, well, in terms of this channel, on Saturday, the 4th of April, which is Easter Saturday, should be getting Hunger back to continue the series on modern Iran. We'll be looking at the policies of Reza Shah. So if you find that interesting, please give that a watch. And yeah, other than that, nothing else coming up other than the next Belisario stream I'm going to do with Marcus at some point in the future on the Gothic War, and of course anything else I feel inspired to stream on. So thank you everybody for watching, and good night.